Good evening, and welcome to the first half of Archizines Live. My name is Elias Redstone. I'm the curator of the Archizines project that from today is being exhibited at the Faculty of Architecture here at the Cambre Horta. And we're going to start the session by a brief introduction to the Archizines project before we go into a discussion with our panelists here on editorial takes on architecture. Okay, here we go.
Oh, and it's like moving. We don't want it to move.
Okay, well, it may move, but I'll have to talk very quickly. So Archizines started as a... It's moving way too quickly.
Let's stop it. Yeah, go.
Okay. Archizines started as a personal research project by collecting different publications, architecture, fanzines, journals, magazines that were all presenting a different outlook on architecture, and present an alternative to the more established architectural press that had been existing. The projects on display in the exhibition represent a crossroads of publishing, editorial work, graphic design, and digital culture, and take upon them different forms. So you have newspapers, you have pamphlets, you have magazines, you have print on demand. And together, this represents this new generation of what publishing could be for architecture within a digital age. I launched the project as a website in January 2011 as a way of cataloguing these different publications and starting to think about what they were, who was behind them, and what the impact they were having on publishing culture today. The website turned into an exhibition that was curated for the Architectural Association in London. And the main aim of this was to make public these publications and bring them in front of people so they could be explored, they could be read and researched. Alongside the publications, we interviewed all the editors to find out what they were doing, find out what this relationship was between architecture and publishing, and why so many of them were doing it today. The exhibition has 60 publications from over 20 countries, and alongside it, a catalogue published by Bedford Press further explores this relationship between architecture and publishing. Since the show in London, the exhibition's gone on the road, and it's been touring in 2012. It's visiting 13 countries. It started in Milan, bringing the publications to different countries and bringing together editors from different regions to meet, often for the first time, and start discussing their practice and how it relates to their other work as architects or artists, students, and the other disciplines that have decided or taken it upon them to publish today. During the project, I set criteria for what actually makes up an archizine. All the publications represent an alternative, represent something that didn't exist before. They've all emerged in the last few years. The deadline I set for this project was 2000, but the vast majority have only come up in the last perhaps 5 or 6 years. Many, as we'll see tonight, are even newer than that. As the exhibition traveled, we invited different designers and architects to reinterpret the show for different venues, to think about what these publications were, different ways of presenting them and thinking about them. And every time we brought together the editors behind the publications to discuss in more detail what was going on. So this was Berlin. It was most recently in Japan at the Design Museum in Osaka, and now we're here in Brussels. So I'm co-chairing the event this evening with Véronique, Patteeuw. We are going to introduce some of the themes we'd like to discuss, and our panelists, who will then go on to make a brief presentation to introduce their publication to you before we can really get into a discussion about how perhaps they connect or disconnect with architecture and publishing culture today.
Okay, we met each other before. We met each other already in London at the AA School for an Archizines Live, and we met each other last month in Paris again. But each time in different constellations. Each time there are different Archizines invited for different reasons. And we decided with Elias and also with the organizing committee here in Brussels to focus this time on editorial takes on architecture. Why these architects gathered here around the table choose for the foundation of an architectural magazine and choose for architectural practice through editorial platforms, through the foundation of a magazine, through the foundation of a leaflet, of posters, of other projects like the Book of Copies, which Ludovico will present maybe later on as well. That's the main focus of our debate. What is important in that focus is that a lot of the magazines were founded because of a certain reason. And I would like to focus on that reason. The way how these different architects develop their editorial projects is very much related to critical stances that they develop through their projects. Critical stances on architecture, on architectural publishing today, on the more important media related to architecture, but also critical stances toward how architecture is talked about, written about, and read about today. These are some of the main issues we will try to develop in the debate. I will first present the speakers to you tonight. At my far right, we have Sébastien Martinez-Barat, who is an architect. He graduated from the architectural school Paris-Malaquais, and one of the founders of the architectural magazine Phase B, which is here in the exhibition, an architecture magazine located in Paris, founded in 2007. He is working as an architect in the agency La Ville Rayée, and is also an editor of another magazine, which is called Politique de l'Image. Maybe you can tell us something about that later on as well, Sébastien. To his left, we have Ernst van der Hoeven. Ernst studied art history with a specialization in architecture at the Rijksuniversiteit Groningen. And in 1994, he co-founded the Rotterdam-based architectural historian office, Crimson, which more of you might know. After studying landscape architecture at the Milan Politecnico, he founded EVDH, Ernst van der Hoeven, an urban landscape studio in Amsterdam in 2002. Together with the artist Frank Bruggeman and graphic designer Samira Ben Laloua, he founded and publishes Club Donny, a journal that they founded in 2008, and which is based on a personal experience of nature in an urban environment. Next to Ernst, Françoise Fromonot, architect by training. She teaches at the architectural school Paris-Belleville and also at the École nationale des ponts et chaussées and at Sciences Po, both located in Paris. Françoise was editor of L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui between 1994 and 1998 and co-editor-in-chief of Le Visiteur between 1999 and 2003. She is one of the founding members of Criticat, founded in 2007.
And finally, to give a proper introduction, Véronique Patteeuw. She's an engineer architect based in Paris. She teaches at the architecture schools of Lille and Versailles. What?
Sorry, I forgot Ludovico. I'm so impressed because he brought a present for me, so he's already completely... No. So Ludovico is an architect based in Milan, founded San Rocco in 2010, 10. And he is an architect also involved in the architectural practice Salotto Buono. They worked as editors first for Abitare from 2007 until 2011, 11, for the instructions and material manuals section for Abitare. And they worked since April 2011 as creative directors for Domus. So in parallel to the architectural practice and to San Rocco, you're involved also in other editorial practices. Okay, sorry.
Back to Véronique. As well as teaching, Since 1998, she's worked as an editor in various contexts. In 2002, she co-founded A16, an editorial collective based here in Brussels, and developed the series Young Architecture. Since 2004, she's been an editor at OASE, the Journal for Architecture. So to start proceedings, we are going to go through each of the publications. We've set 5 short questions for them to respond as a means of introduction. So, accompanied by 5 images, they will let us know what is their publication, who are the people behind the publication, and why did they come together, what provoked them to publish, what are the aims of their publication, and what topics are you addressing with their said publication. So we're going to start with Véronique and OASE.
Elias told us that we have to be very quick, so I'll have to talk very quick. OASE is included in the Archizines, although it was not founded after 2000, so we are kind of an exception on the rule. OASE was founded in 1981 by the students of the architectural faculty of the University of Delft as a counter-project. A project because they were not agreeing with the architectural education that they received at that moment, and they started an architectural journal as a kind of form of self-education. Since then, OASE grew and became an international architectural journal, both in 2 languages, in Dutch and in English, published 3 times a year, and published around specific themes that we try to address in each of the specific issues. While the point of departure was a form of discontent of these students to form their architectural journal, today this content is no longer necessary, but there is a kind of free state in a way that the journal is for us a kind of free state, as we can elaborate different themes and different researches which we could maybe not do in our own architectural practices, both as practitioners or as academics. So the journal is a kind of way for us to address topics as, for instance, the model, or as, for instance, architecture and literature, or, for instance, exhibition and architecture, or, for instance, Africa, themes that we cannot address in our specific researches within the university or within our own practices. What is important for OASE is that there is always a connection between theory and practice. We are 11 editors in OASE. Half of them are based in the academic world as teachers, as researchers, as PhD researchers. The other half are practitioners with their own architectural practice. And the debates that we have making OASE, and I think it's also very much reflecting in the contents of each of the issues, is very much an aller-retour, going and go between these 2 themes. How can we address one specific topic, both from a historical and a theoretical point of view, and making sure that what we are doing is also important for practicing architects. So a lot of the times we interview, for instance, people related to one of the specific themes to gather what they are doing in their practice. Second important theme is architectural criticism. Architectural criticism that we are elaborating in different ways within the journal, both examining how we can write and talk and read and draw about architecture. This is one example from issue 81, which is called Constructing Criticism, which is in the Archizines exhibition. And we asked a young artist, Karel Navrot, to go to the MAS, the museum in Antwerp, and to go back after a long visit and to draw what was left in his memory as a kind of way of criticizing the building, because what he left in his memory became the drawing that you see and became for him the most important parts of his visit through this building. So I just showed this one example to show how we can think about architectural criticism within the concept of a journal through different means. Finally, what is important for us is printed matter. OASE is now online available, except for the last 3 issues, is online available on our website, but we still think it's very much important that we keep the journal in a printed form. We work together since 1990 with Karel Martens, who some of you might know, as somebody says yes, as a graphic designer, an important graphic designer for a whole generation of graphic designers in the Netherlands. And I think that the way each of the issues of OASE is constructed is also because we work with Karel Martens, and we try to invent for each of the issues a new graphic way of presenting the material that we gathered.
Well, bluntly said, Club Donny is not more than a collection of images about nature and the urban environment, and the focus is then the personal experience about that. And the magazine is unstitched, so it's more a hybrid of a magazine than a real magazine that you can fold and keep together. But of course, we are also have also the aim of being a magazine, so it is a printed matter thing, and we like the idea that people keep the magazine as it is, because you could also just fold it apart and make your own collection. And moreover, it's also about a juxtaposition about two ways of seeing. That's the way when you fold it open, it's you always see those very harsh, almost it always collide in the journal itself, and we think that's important because we get the images from people that send in from all over the world through our website. It's made by 3 persons that had a mutual interest in nature, in the urban environment at that time in Rotterdam. We loved the way nature almost won from the city in the way when there was a lot of derelict land in Rotterdam, and we always loved to go there and see how the nature was loose, but also had a very great influence on our own well-being. So we thought, and that was maybe the trigger to make this magazine. That of course there were a lot of magazines about nature or about house and garden lifestyle-like magazines, but we missed the more personal experience about nature and about sharing that experience with other people. So that's also why we call each other Club. And Club Donny, why Club Donny? That's the main question we always get, because what's the sort of tacky name is that? But it's Donny is the main character in the movie Broken Flowers from Bill Murray's, and that was a sort of sad character that goes with this sort of ugly bunch of flowers. So it's not about the beauty of the flower, but about the whole mentality of that. And that's also what I think, that I sit here is not because of the nature. Maybe it's more about the city and ways of seeing, and about because when you ask me which topics you address, it's of course nature, but then it's more the personal way of seeing nature. But then it could also be a very negative thing. You know, people that have a trauma about their holidays in Norway and about being lost in nature. You know, it's not only a beautiful thing. Nature is also a harsh and overwhelming thing. And well, this image, what I show here is the shipyard of Gdansk, where I did a project for an art institution. You hardly see it because the nature is so strong that it overgrows the architecture, and the people that worked there didn't even see that. They were not aware of that, and then I started to make this silent movie, and then they all of a sudden start to see their own environment. And I think this could be what this magazine is about, that you help people seeing their own environment, and it sharpens your ways of seeing. And that's also why it is important to see different parts of nature from all over the world. And I think now we live in, well, 80% of the world is almost urbanized. So the the way we represent nature is also going to change, and that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Sorry. Do you want to say when you want to move the slides on?
Yeah, okay. San Rocco is a project of collaboration. It's born in 2008-9, and we released the first issue in 2010. As I said, it's a project of collaboration, and its main outcome it's this magazine, you see, which is composed by 3 elements. One is the editorial, the beginning. There's this bunch of non-hierarchical contributions. And finally, there's the call for papers. The call for papers is a quite relevant instrument for us because it explains the next topic which is coming out, and through a text and a series of case studies, we invite people to submit proposals. San Rocco is constituted by 3 key elements, which are texts, all in English. Drawing for us is a very important tool of knowledge. So we basically redraw every drawing you find in the magazine, both section plans and these axonometries you see, and pictures. Apart from the magazine, which is the main outcome, we have presentations, and then we also organize sometimes some exhibition. So for us, matter is very important part of our activity. Yeah, we both also have a website, but this is not the main. Okay. Who is doing San Rocco? On this table, which is nowadays in the Venice Biennale, you see 50 contributions about the theme of collaborations. These were produced by the people who founded and runs the magazine, which are 3 Italian architectural offices, 2A+P in Rome, Baucu once in Genoa and now in Milano, Salotto Bono once in Venice and now in Milano, and another Belgian office, which is office Kersten Geer, Stevino and Severen, plus 3 photographers, Giovanna Silva and Stefano Graziani from Italy and Bas Prinsen, plus a graphic designer, which is Francesca Pellicciari. Then around this core, let's say, there's a more or less growing group of people who's collaborating to the magazine and who's been invited to take part also in this project. Why we funded the magazine? Even if there's this even growing quantity of websites and blogs dedicated to architecture, there's still around a lot of people interested in printed matter. And especially some of us, like our office, who's been involved in editorial activity since many years. And mainly, this is a specific Italian condition, but I think is also quite a worldwide one. We were on one side dissatisfied, also as readers, from the mainstream magazines and their lack basically of criticism, their run after the last project being built. And on the other side, on the lack of care that is put in academic and university products, which are often they have very good contents, but the way they are produced and distributed is not working to reach a wide audience. What we share in all the editorial team and group is that the whole body of built work and theory of architecture since the ancient times is out there, is a common shared knowledge, which can be taken from to produce architecture, and which every project we do continues to build up this body of knowledge. And we, a side project that she mentioned before is the Book of Copies, which was originally thought as an online one, but then we've been invited by FET in the Museum of Copies in Biennale, so we finally did it also physically. Is this incremental archive on a specific topic, but maybe I'll talk about this later. Yeah. And the topics we addressed, so San Rocco is going to die. We decided in a quite specific way, and it was intended to be in 20 issues in 5 years, but finally we realized that 4 issues per year were too much, so there are 3 per year. So quite Italian way of adapting things. And basically we tried to set up all the topics from the beginning, so you see them in the list. And they're usually monographical issues, sometimes quite uncommon ones, sometimes more clearly understandable.
Criticat is an independent journal based in Paris and published twice a year, March and September, in French since 5 years. When I say independent, we are totally independent, including financially. Nobody has talked about how they are funded, or maybe Véronique a little bit, but we are funded only by subscriptions and readers' money, meaning we don't have any money from schools, from institutions, from the state, or from any institution, because we believe that to do some architectural criticism and criticism in general, it's a much better status to be totally autonomous and to not owe your existence financially to people you might be driven to criticize. So we've been publishing Criticat for 5 years, I said, so 10 issues. So you see 10 windows with 10 people reading Criticat, the postcard we've published for our 5th anniversary. We've started it as an associative venture. We were 5 at the beginning, all of us architects, either practicing or not, most of us teaching, academics, and having various activities. And our idea was to create something that could be an alternative to commercial architecture journals, to l'architecture d'aujourd'hui, to Technique et Architecture, to all, and more internationally, to journals which are very dependent on architects for the material they publish, which are dependent on funding by advertising, which we are not, and which therefore rehash, that was our view, often the same images, and are at pain sometimes to produce a sort of intelligibility of what architecture means, how it's produced, its difficulties, also its stakes. So that idea was articulated through the production of a material object which would be cheap to produce, easy to circulate via internet, and also precious in a way. We work with graphic designers who are based in New York, and like us, who work for free. We all work for free. We work for this journal as a sort of, let's say, hobby. And to have a sort of quite systematic and quite spare layout, which would, one, rehabilitate criticism in a way, and the text through which it is carried out. Two, rethink the balance between images and texts, be in black and white for images to be absolutely necessary, and break with the dependency with architects' stuff by taking our own pictures, commissioning people to draw architecture, and using paper clippings, newspaper clippings, instead of asking the perspectives of the buildings we criticize to architects. We tackle any topic, providing it fits our editorial line, which is quite precise but quite open as well. Our idea being that architecture being at the sort of crossroads of many fields, from politics to economics to technical things to the discipline itself, to all sorts of fields that interest society, to produce a journal, which is an intellectual journal through its format, and explicitly so, and that takes architecture as a lens to understand what's going on out there, and how architecture transforms the world, but also how architecture can help understand how the world transforms itself. So this is the cover and back cover of our latest issue, number 10, which has a general theme of women and architecture, but which contains articles on some practicing architecture, for some practicing women, as well as some texts, some translation of a text by Denise Scott-Brown, a text by the architecture and landscape critic of a daily of Genève, on a landscape project, a letter from a student who went to study in the architecture school of Valparaiso and who talks about the pros and cons of the architecture school there, etc., etc. So this, to sort of summarize, a journal which seeks to bring architecture into the public debate through criticism, understood as the main tool that we have to achieve that goal of making the world intelligible through architecture.
Yeah. So FaceB was a magazine. I say it was because after 3 issues we decided to stop it. And I should say more, it was a little magazine in a sense that it was an independent and an amateur project. At first, it was Aurélien Gillet who invited us, Benjamin Lafort and I, to sing on a publication project as a side project of the school. We published 3 issues, really different, one from the other. We published it when we were a student, and the publication was for us a kind of bridge between the school and the world after the school. The magazine was something that took us out of the school. It was a way for us to crossing a moment of anxiety, trying to find a path between all the architectural discourse that we share, that we learn, that we want to understand. Of course, the magazine was an object. This is the object. We see it as an object. But this object is hiding, I think, something more interesting. I think it's more relevant to think at the magazine as more as a dynamic structure than a simple collection of issues. The publication was a way for us to share and build a kind of common ground, affinities about what can be our practices, our architect. But this sharing wasn't driven by a kind of theoretical agenda that we set up before publishing. We discovered it by doing the magazine. And in this sense, it was really a research project. Making an issue was a research project involving a larger group of persons than the 3 of us. And this process involved a lot of contradiction. From the idea to build up an archive on a specific subject, the idea of strategy, the legitimation of a discourse or a practice, and the idea of a magazine perhaps as a part of an atelier for doing architecture, I mean build architecture. There is a kind of friction. In this sense, the object is not really, and the moment of the publication is perhaps a detail in this biggest project. And the magazine is perhaps not published for an audience. It's more animated by the will to share something with, it's not animated by the will to share something with the public, but more with the people who made it. And it's a selfish idea about the magazine, but Of course, this idea is of a publication made for a little group of persons involved in this fabrication as a kind of souvenir, a kind of archive of a cultural moment. It's not a goal, but it's more something that we feel was shaping the magazine. What provoked? No, this is a good one. Making the magazine was for us a way to set up a space for think about architecture beside the school, beside the practices of architecture. It wasn't a peaceful space. It was animated by a lot of questioning and friction. There was a kind of violence in the participation. We did it because we need it. And the publication was a kind of alibi for producing text, paper project, meeting people, a sort of catalyzer for thinking about architecture and trying to experiment the magazine as a critic activity. And we did it because it was really easy to do it. And we all learned this software in school, and we don't like. At this time, we didn't feel really close from the publication that we can find. So why don't we have to do one? It was really easy to do it. So we have the tools. So let's make it. Next, as I say, for us, the magazine was a way to do a kind of a clear cut into architectural culture and just ask the question why and how making architecture. So this is an image from Frédéric Blanciac. It's a kind of method for producing different shapes of buildings, so that we published. So anyway, next. What next, Elias? What topic are you addressing in your publication? From cultural studies to a discourse on architecture made by the tool of architecture, we kind of experience a lot of posture for producing critique. For us, the idea was to do like micro-critique, micro-theory, and it's not we don't want to share like, I don't know, to find solution on subject, but it's more, the image is fireflies. This is a kind of metaphor for what can be a little zine in a critic mass. It's like a fireflies trying to driving his own path, trying to touch something in the air, but it's just a point, a little point, but an attractive point in a more larger critic math. Something little but relevant.
Thank you very much, Sébastien. I think that what we had with the small presentations that we asked you is the gradients between the different journals. There is the kind of unedited and pure images of Club Donny showing two different perspectives on the same natural situation, an urban situation within nature. We have a more text magazine almost against images, or rethinking the way how we can use images with Criticat, and using architectural criticism to engage with architecture. We have the more introverted fanzine of FASB, where you can allow yourselves to go into details of one specific very personal research. And we have the very rigid engagement towards the public with San Rocco, where you have a structure of all the different teams set up for your 5-year plan, and you have a structured journal. But we have different things in common, I think, as well. And maybe we can kind of focus on that, focus on 3 different themes that I had in mind to open up the discussion also with the audience on these editorial takes on architecture. The first one would be foundation. Why do you found an architectural journal? Why did you guys found an architectural journal? And some of you already reacted on that. And how are you capable of surviving as a small magazine, the ones that did not die yet, would be a first team. A second one would be writing and reading architecture. What do we write about when we start a journal, and how do we write about architecture? In what way do we use text and images to do so? And then a third final team would be choosing for printed matter. And choosing for printed matter in a way, I think that Françoise already kind of elaborated on that, choosing for printed matter that allows us as little magazines or archizines to continue to survive would be a third question that I have. But maybe we can start with foundation, and I would like to ask Françoise to elaborate a little bit on that, because you told us all that you are an independent magazine, but you didn't tell us yet why did you found Criticat 5 years ago?
Well, we wanted to have a place to write. We wanted a home for ourselves. We're a bunch of, as I said, friends. Some of us, Valérie Didlon and Pierre Chabard and myself, we had been involved together in the Le Visiteur before that, which had stopped at number 10. We are at number 10, so now we are shaking with anxiety. And we really were frustrated with what existed as places to write. I mean, we were all contributing to l'Architecture d'aujourd'hui at some stage for Pierre Chabard. Valérie and I were writing for DEA, d'Architecture. But it's always very frustrating, even if you have critical freedom, and we had for DEA, for instance. And you write an article, and then next to your article is one which you totally disagree with, and it's sometimes your ad is, there are ads in the middle of your article. I mean, all that prompted us to think that we would like to make something which would be that object which we control completely, and which makes the little community of the editorial board a thinking little community. We also wanted to have this relationship amongst ourselves where we discuss the articles, we fight sometimes, somebody arrives with an idea, and at the end of the committee the idea has completely changed, it's become very big, or sometimes it's been abandoned. I mean, all these these small these affinities and this production that an editorial board is, we wanted that to re-exist. I have known l'Architecture d'aujourd'hui since I am the oldest one in this panel. When I was working as an editor there, we had an editorial board, and then journals gradually lost their editorial boards for money reasons, and I was really missing that. I mean, the exchanges that reflect in the journal, this sort of micro-society of critics that meets every 2 weeks and that discusses and elaborates things. So for these two reasons, frustration and a positive move towards producing something that would be the reflection of our reflection, and that would then be given out to readers who would like to share it.
And how do you experience this? Because now it's like 5 years, 10 issues. This total freedom that you constructed for yourselves with Criticat, is it something which is guiding and helping you in constructing the journal? Or is it something also quite difficult? Do you have own selection criteria for topics that you want to address, that you cannot address, that you would like to address? Is it a big fight and then it's ending up with an issue which is a compromise issue? Or how do you deal with this freedom?
Well, we don't have an absolute freedom, which, I mean, I don't know if that exists anyway, but we are limited or structured, let's say, by two things. One, two things we wanted, and that the journal is constructed upon. One is this editorial line that I tried briefly to sketch. This idea that, I mean, it's not easy to have contributors who accept to write in a different way as they usually do, especially amongst academics. Because really our take on buildings or on projects or any subject really is to, again, based on inquiry, on visits of the buildings or of the books or subjects we decide to tackle, and through that construct the articles in such a way as to sort of enlighten a little bit something which goes beyond the subject itself. So that seems quite open as an editorial line, but it's actually quite constraining. And of course the second constraint is money, because we don't have much of it. So, but it's a good sort of incentive to think about, you know, the economy of the whole thing together. Our time, the journal itself, its appearance, the number of images we put, the discussions with the printer. By the way, we are now printed in Belgium. So these are actually quite strong constraints, but quite generative ones, I think.
To follow up on that, and the idea of having an editorial board and those kind of discussions being important for you in your practice, I was wondering if I could ask Ernst to maybe elaborate on the notion of something that is strictly unedited and how you see that process and how that process works for you.
Well, maybe then I have to tell also that we are a magazine, but we are also our website. I didn't say that, I think, and that's of course very important that we have a huge platform globally. People find us, I don't know how they found us, probably just by Urban Nature or something, and then they just comment at our site, and they could contribute to freely, so it's just a very open platform to our magazine. So if for us it is very important that we share the ways of seeing, different ways of seeing from all over the world, and maybe that's even more important than our own mutual interest for nature. And maybe I also have to say that we are free persons and we come from totally different backgrounds. There's a graphic designer who actually found the unique format and works on that. And there is an artist, Frank Bergman, who is also a florist and really knows how to work with flowers. And then there's me, who's more a landscape architect from background. And but we think it's very important for this magazine, and I still try to stress that, is that it's more about the city, and in that way more about not only about architecture or about nature or about the different disciplines, but it's more about being citizens and living in a city and sharing all these stories, because besides of the 12 images in it, it's also 6 beautiful stories told, unillustrated. We never use images at that side because we think the stories has to be so well written that people understand and see these images for themselves. But what was the question? How we unedit? Well, the thing is that it is a democratic platform, so it's also in a way a fight, because then you get all this information from all over the world and you sit together and you have to choose 12 images, which is could be arbitrary, but also because of the fact that we don't have a theme, which is also very rare, of course. I think that's why we never get the stipendium in the Netherlands, because they always want to have a certain theme. And we said the theme is the personal experience. So that's the broader view of, and that's maybe too broad for a lot of people to understand. But so it's mainly a fight more than a real editorial board. We just sit and fight for our own darlings, and sometimes they are the same, and then there's no discussion at all. But mostly there is, and I think that's good too. So then in the end there are these 12 images, and it's of course more than that. It's also all the things behind. And
Ludovico, do you fight as well with the other two? And another question that I have related to this editing and founding the journal is that you explained us that you founded San Rocco both as a protest against a kind of too many publications that are present, and academic publications which are the superfluous publications, and academic publications which are not paying any attention to how they could evolve with the public. I was wondering if there's also a second reason for, or a third reason for founding San Rocco, because the difference between the editorial board of San Rocco and the editorial board of Criticat, for instance, is that we are all that we are all trained as architects, but that you are more working in the academic field, and your partners in Criticat as well, and that you are also practicing architects. So in what way is San Rocco also a kind of parallel project to your architectural practice, and was it founded that way or not at all?
I start from the last question. Yeah, I mean, we are quite strict in the way the magazine, let's say, looks. So it's about how is drawn, the quality of the drawings and the images. And this is something which you find also in our practices. It's the same way of looking at reality through drawings and producing projects. So while we are very strict on this, let's say on how the magazine is built, so around this call for papers and editorial, the editorial often is quite arrogant. It's quite taking a very also rough position sometimes, and this is partly because we are made like that, and partly because we try to take out from people a position, no? Which is something that you find just architectural chronicles and not architectural opinions or critiques. And so, yeah, then when the proposals arrive, about some of them we totally agree, some of them no. So we have huge fights, and 10 people more or less. We read the proposals and we select them. And usually happens often that half of them say you're completely out of the way. I mean, that the editorial position is bullshit, basically, or even not so roughly, but you're wrong, no? So we try to have different opinions, and to publish them. And yeah, the other thing is that yeah, we are also independent. The only way we try to raise money is people being friends or donors, but it's basically private persons. It's not state or universities. Also, yeah.
So you're not that independent.
But we feel free to say their work is shit or good when.
Can you criticize the work of office?
Sorry?
Can you criticize the work of office in?
Yeah, I think so. Why? I mean, if someone, I don't think Ernst is writing. I mean, no. There's one rule that you never write about yourself, and we, how do you say, we refused some proposals that were about the works of our offices, and they were too saying it was very good and nice, and we said, no, maybe it's not the case. Yeah, then one other thing you said, it's correct. It's San Rocco. It's been founded and mainly written by architects, and I mean not trained or that didn't study in a very academic environment. So also the quality of texts sometimes lacks from this point of view. If you look at them, we had some critics in Italy from some very old professors, very strict and saying, you write a text in a very not precise way, the notes they're missing and so on. This doesn't mean that we refuse a proposal from academics, but mainly it's written by an architect. I don't know if I answered everything.
And your relationship with your own practice?
Yeah, one is the one I said, is about method, or the way you look at the word. And the other one is also something which is very generational, which is basically we are all the same age. The name San Rocco comes from a project made by Rossi and Grassi for a competition where they were really young. and it was a collaborative project, and somehow the result was something that you don't find in that way in their following work. So we also shared this dynamic somehow, and also like the first issue is also sort of maybe you understood that later, but it's a sort of manifesto. It is called Innocence, and so we thought it was quite a precise way to define our state of being 3 years ago, maybe also now, but.
Looking from a distance, I think there's been some real parallels between San Rocco the magazine and San Rocco the practice, even though one has capitals and the other doesn't. I think that's correct. There's been parallels in thinking between the publication and the practice. And I want to ask Sébastien if when you decide to end a publication, does that mean that it no longer has a role for your practice, or did your practice outgrow the publication, or did you decide that publishing is not something that is suitable for an architect to be doing from a certain point or a certain age?
I think that little magazine don't die; they finish the end, and that's really different. That a little magazine is a platform for empowering a little community. This idea of empowering, not making architecture, just empowering debate, criticism, but in a selfish way for a little group of people. So a little magazine don't want to take place and publish again and again and again, years and years, and legitimate a kind of discourse. It's more like an open laboratory. And again, that's the fact that we have to publish something. It's an alibi. I don't know how do you say in English. It's an alibi for putting people together. So the raison d'être of a little magazine are really local, and they are not timeless. They are really based on affinity that we share at a specific moment, a cultural moment, and I think it's really linked to the activity of the people of this little community. It's a dissolved community. It's not like a group of persons that we can. But anyway, there is a kind of energy that is working. We can do the publication, and when we begin to do architecture or publish text to other journal, something happened. But it was not sad. It was just. This moment was closed, and we have 3 issues. It's a trilogy, and we can see really a path between the issue, and this is something little, and there is a kind of coherence. I don't know how to say. We see a coherence of what happened, but it's more like a portrait of family than a major theoretical contribution.
I think it's interesting you think that because it's a little magazine, it necessarily involves a little community. If you compare it to Club Donny, that is reaching out and trying to create what you would probably describe as a large community through the...
No, it started off with a very small community, really just friends sharing their experiences from nature in the urban environment, and from a very personal angle. And we also thought it was... it should be very small and self-publishing and precious, but not global. And on the other hand, we started it in English, so we had a sort of dream that it could be a little bit broader than that. But maybe it's not a niche anymore. Nature in cities, it becomes really a thing that's people start to be aware of, and I think the awareness is maybe the main aim of keeping on with it, because, well, we share this enormous interest in unplanned nature in cities, which you don't necessarily see in magazines.
I would like to combine one of the next themes, which is surviving as a journal, together with how do we write about architecture, because we could, of course, a journal needs to survive because of financial reasons, but it's also a kind of personal project for the editors, and so they need to put up the energy and the enthusiasm to continue with their journal. I was wondering, Françoise, since the beginning, did things change during these 10 issues of Criticat, and in the way how you address topics, and in the way how you deal with these questions of text and images within Criticat? For one thing is that I think that you in the very beginning you didn't work with somebody who is the person who is drawing, so maybe this is something which changed. And I think in the very beginning you didn't have a dossier, a teamed group. Maybe you can tell.
Well, things have evolved and the team has changed too. I mean, we're only 3 members of the initial team, the 3 sort of pillars, but we've been joined by different people of different backgrounds who have enriched considerably the team and who have come to us also on the strength of our first issues. And we were building the sort of concept of Criticat as we were publishing the issues. So what has changed is now, I think, after 10 issues, we're starting to really see and think clearly what we wanted initially, and which we did. We learned, it's like, you know, learning to ride a bike. We just did it. And we had this general concept that I explained of this idea of writing through architecture and addressing other people than strictly the community of architects. It's very important, I think. And all the moves, sort of subsequent moves came from that. And we're also, what has changed also is that we're starting to receive contributions from people who are subscribers, who have read the journal since 5 years, who are, and this take on architecture is starting to sort of, how can I say, ça prend comme une sauce. Hein? So we receive from young critics or less young people who send us synopses that we accept, that we develop with the critics, and that is changing, and that's really something we wanted initially. Initially, we write in every issue almost the editorial board, not always, but we consider we have to write in every issue almost, and now we get this sort of feedback under the form of proposals for articles, which we don't have to refuse because it's too academic or too this or not enough that, and that is really changing, and we feel that there is a kind of dynamics that is starting.
So the community around Criticat is also changing. If it started as a smaller project of 3 individuals, now we could talk about a community or not?
Well, I don't know if at which number a community starts. We were 5 initially, plus the graphic designers. Some have left for reasons, various reasons, not at all some disputes or anything, but people who wanted to do something else. And we've been joined by Martin Etienne, for instance, who draws, who is an architect, but who stopped practicing, and now he's an illustrator, and he does these drawings. We commissioned him, for instance, he did a complete, 10 pages of drawings to visit one of the recent urbanistic projects in near Paris, in Boulogne. Instead of doing an article criticizing the result, we sent him there and he drew what he saw. But then again, just like black and white photographs sort of capture the essential of what we want to say, and are not just a sort of, let's say they are less sort of direct reproduction of the complexity that we see. It's already filtered through the absence of colors. Then the drawing is even more a sort of critical act, because you choose what you represent, and then it can become a critical tool. So through that, for instance, we've tried to develop other critical tools which are linked to architecture, because after all, drawing is one of our specialities in the discipline, and use it and to try to renew or to use criticism as a sideways, with a sideways take on what we want to show. yeah, and so amongst the new members, there is also a young architect who practices, Félix Muhl, and Jean Didier Bergilès, who is somewhere around there. So we have extended our committee to friend countries. So it's changing, but the main thing is that I think we are gathered on the basis of these issues and of a shared project, which we each take in our way. Is that an answer? Yes, the audience should talk.
The audience should talk. I have more questions, but I think that the audience has them as well. Okay, think of a question and I'll... I just want to continue a little bit on how do we address architecture through our magazines, through writing and images. The iconographic importance of the magazines are very important, I think. And I would like to have both of you addressing the question, you by telling us a bit more, why do you redraw the plans? And do you get proposals which are maybe only images which are proposed for San Rocco, and how do you deal with it? And why do you choose only to work with images and basically leave the text almost behind?
We work with text as well. So
but the main focus is on...
That's the difficult part, because the main focus starts to be on photography. A lot of people just categorize us not as architecture or nature, but under photography, because they say that's your medium. But I'm really would love to make a 10th issue where all the photos are drawings. I think, because it's about nature and urban, it could also be drawings, and I think that could be a beautiful 10th issue, just to give the idea of just changing the whole mindset. But what I think is important for our issue is that it's a very personal journal. So if it is text, it's almost always mostly sort of nostalgia about people's growing up. It's crazy when people have to write about nature that they go back to their youth, as if it is hard to relate to nature now. So the stories are almost always sort of nostalgia, and then the pictures are very now because they're taken. We really try hard to mix in with some black and white photos from almost vintage photos, just to also break that rule. But it's how the format is. It's just a very personal way of telling or sharing a mutual interest, and it's nothing more than that. I'm afraid, but it's very blunt. It's just we think that should be the way.
It's very coherent. Yeah. Do you want to react on that?
Why we redraw? You asked.
I think the importance of the images in San Rocco, and why do you choose for the drawing and redrawing of the plans?
Okay, so one is about the images and one the drawings. Yeah. But why we draw? Because many times in many magazines, drawings are treated like a slap in the face to the drawing's face. I mean, they're not respected. I mean, they're not printed in the proper scale. You have too many informations or not enough informations. You have, as she said also before, when you draw, it's an act of exclusion of many things, no? So also we're a bit fetishist, maybe. So we like everything to be very sharp, clean, and precise, and understandable in a glance. So that's basically why we redraw things. Then it's also a great way to learn also as an architect, because that this is something we already began with Abitare since many years, but it's a wonderful tool to improve. Then I don't agree with her at all about the fact that a black and white picture it's more objective or not. I mean, colorful images could be much more with a new and fresh view about something than a black and white. I don't think the just the color fact is something which makes you more or less pornographic from the image point of view, no? So I don't think at all color is the matter. Then it's true that how people, how photographers shoot, that's relevant. I mean, the view they have is not color, not color.
And for me, I think that for me the choice, but maybe that's my reading of San Rocco, the choice that you took to present projects through drawings is a kind of critical stance towards this overwhelming amount of images that are circulating about architecture and that are circulating certain images of what a building could be. Going back to the drawing is also going back to a certain comprehension of what architecture could be instead of what is circulated now in diverse media.
Yeah, and maybe, I don't know if I got it well. She also said you'd like to address a wider audience than architects, no? This is something we also sort of, I wouldn't say we don't agree. I mean, we're not so, yeah, I mean, we talk with other disciplines, that's normal. But we think that especially since the 90s, or let's say from the end of the 80s, architects felt like they had a very poor role in society, usually addressed as the guys who build these monstrous big buildings or horrible houses, no? And they addressed this bad reputation because they somehow just spoke between themselves, a very closed language, very not comprehensible from the outside, no? Like a Masonic setta, how do you say, Masonic club or whatever. And so from one point of view, this was somehow true, but then the reaction was to somehow liquefy the knowledge as architects in many other smaller rivers, like architects had been trying to be sociologists and every possible work you can think about, we did that. And I also think this didn't work because we didn't earn much power or reputation through that. So what we think it's, first of all, try to be competent in what is supposed to be your work and your language you're speaking. And after this, you can better address wider audiences, I think. So that's why we went back also to somehow also many articles are boring for architects and are boring for other people. But now we know them, and I also sometimes I can't stand some of them. It's really but okay, sorry.
No, I think it's important, perhaps we haven't touched upon one thing which I think explains a lot about the differences in the journals. It's also the context in which they were created. And I think the northern Italian context, the French context, and Dutch context are extremely different, and we have different reasons to be frustrated or wanting to do something, and we have different the French context, I'm not going to start on that because otherwise it's going to be, nobody wants to hear about it. But we have a very specific history of the teaching of architecture, of the fact that architecture was not related to the university, and therefore there was a divorce between architects and the intellectual world, and also with the society after 1945. I mean, there is all that explains also why we as architects were a bit, well, defrocked, let's say. We think it's important to create, we thought, to create something which both interests architects but also beyond them, people who are intellectuals or people who are interested in in the civic debate at large, of which architecture should participate, and therefore engage with that. And I suppose in Milan or in the Netherlands, it's a different story. And perhaps you, I don't know if it's.
I think that's a very good thing. That is, of course, it's related to the context, and those contexts, even in Europe, can be very different.
Okay, we're starting to run over time, so I really would like to open this up to the audience now. If they'd like to pursue questions about context, if they'd like to ask our editorial talent on the panel here about their approaches to editing publications, about whether publishers of little magazines are necessarily narrow-minded, or whether little magazines will necessarily always have a little community and a little public. Are there any questions out there? I would like to ask about editorial practice and sort of going live with things. San Rocco is currently exhibiting in the Venice Biennale. Club Donny celebrates not only the website, but launches of presentations and live events.
Actually, that's a very good point. Can I just say something about that? Because that's the way we exist. It's because we also are not funded at all. We just there was a very rich subsidized culture in the Netherlands, but since we exist, that has been vaporized. So there's no money from the state, but there are a lot of art institutions that know Club Donny and like to adopt the idea of what we stand for. And then what we do is, when we have found such an adoptive father or mother, that we just go there and we just discuss the way of how we could work together. So this issue was adopted by the museum, the pavilions in Almere, and it just gave us all the freedom that we needed to make this issue. But the very lounge was a co-production with them, and for them it was very nice, because we have this huge club that we could just ask to come over, and then we tell about our magazine, and they tell about what their projects. So it's a way of just making yourself to fund yourself, and this, I think that could I would challenge everybody to just start a magazine and do it just like this, because it's a very good way to well, in our way to look, to observe your own environment.
These are very nice words to end with, and it touches upon this last theme that I had in mind, the surviving issue, or the surviving theme of how can carry on our journals. Do we need to bear in mind restrictions in order to get the project financed through the readers without the help of other institutions? Or do we need to be kind of parasites and use specific grounds or specific availabilities of people welcoming us with our project to start the journal? I think that's a kind of difference in what you explained and what Françoise told us in the beginning.
We never bet on one horse, but
yeah. But it was a very nice thought of starting an own magazine as a way of observing a built environment and taking a critical stance towards that. I would like to thank all of you. If there is no urgent question from the room. Oh, there is one.
Est-ce que je peux la poser en français? Merci. Donc déjà, je m'excuse, mon anglais n'est pas parfait, donc si ça se trouve, ma question a déjà trouvé sa réponse, mais je n'ai pas forcément bien comprise. C'est la question du public auquel s'adressent toutes ces publications. C'est vraiment, on fait une publication, c'est qu'on veut aussi aller vers un public et le toucher. Donc je me posais plusieurs questions. Le public qui était ciblé au début, mais ça c'est peut-être plus difficile à évaluer, le public qui a été effectivement touché, est-ce que ça reste strictement dans les cercles architecturaux de professionnels, ou alors est-ce que ça a pu aussi intéresser, toucher d'autres personnes, d'autres professions et d'autres publics?
Pour ce qui nous concerne, c'est assez difficile à dire.
parce qu'on a très peu de statistiques sur... et puis les journaux, les revues circulent, elles sont lues par beaucoup plus de gens, enfin on espère, que on a d'abonnés. Mais c'est vrai qu'on a des retours parfois assez étonnants. Alors on ne se fait pas d'illusions, on est quand même lu principalement par des architectes. Mais il y a des conjoints d'architectes qui font autre chose. On a un mathématicien qui nous a écrit, on a une chorégraphe qui nous a proposé un article qu'on a d'ailleurs publié finalement. Enfin, on arrive à percoler un petit peu dans je dirais, la société civile. Mais on n'a pas beaucoup évidemment de statistiques. On pourra peut-être en faire un jour, on demandera aux gens leur profession, mais bon, c'est pas le but, c'est plus... Alors une chose aussi à laquelle quand on avait envie de faire, c'était de servir d'intermédiaire avec les médias. C'est-à-dire, en général, les médias comprennent rien en architecture et à l'urbanisme, hein, les journalistes de quotidien. Voilà, donc documenter, faire des enquêtes, expliquer, donner des références, articuler des points de vue critiques. Il arrive qu'on soit contacté par des journaux ou par la radio pour du coup réagir sur telle ou telle chose parce que voilà, ils ont ou qu'on soit cité ou que même pas d'ailleurs, que c'est même pas la question d'être cité, ou que ce qu'on a pu publier ait influencé voilà, la manière dont un journaliste qui a lu ça, voilà, ça peut arriver un petit peu. Voilà, c'est un petit peu ça l'idée, mais il n'y a pas de moyen de vérifier quantitativement.
Et pour témoigner de ce que nous on fait avec OASE, parce que j'ai pas du tout parlé de OASE, c'est un peu la même chose en fait. Je pense qu'au début, le journal a été créé vraiment pour un public d'architectes, et petit à petit, ce public a changé. D'une part, il y a eu une communauté de chercheurs qui sont intéressés par certaines thématiques qui sont adressées dans la revue. Il y a toujours encore les architectes qui nous lisent. Et d'autre part, il y a aussi toute une communauté de graphistes qui utilisent la revue comme référence pour leur propre travail sur le graphisme, la typographie, la mise en page, etc. Donc ça s'est diversifié petit à petit au cours des années.
Sorry for this interlude in French.
Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'd like you to join me in thanking Sébastien, Ernst, Françoise, Ludovico, and Véronique for being so frank and honest about their practices today. There's now going to be a change of pace in proceedings. For the second half of Archizines Live today, I'm delighted that we're extending the notions of architecture and publishing and reversing it. The curatorial team for the Brussels Archizines exhibition have invited 12 practices to share with us their publishing inspirations, which I hope and expect will be varied and inspiring to see. So after the 5-minute interlude that we'll have for technical changeover, I'll be handing over to Carlo Menon, Elodie de Gavre, and Sophie Dars to introduce the practices. In the meantime, have a look at the exhibition, have a cigarette break, have a drink. I'd also encourage you to go over to the table over there and see some of the publications by Bedford Press, including the Archizines catalogue, book on publishing practice by 20 publications that you can purchase here tonight. So we'll see you in 5 minutes. Thank you very much.